Good afternoon, all. I do believe it's afternoon. Yes, it is. Good. Okay. This week's Parsha is Parshat Ki Teitzei. Do not forget who you are wherever you go. So we note that 74 of the 613 mitzvot of the Torah, that's a lot, are found in this Parsha. That's significant, being about 1/8 of the total. As we go out, Ki Teitzei, into the world, both the world we know and the world we do not know, we are enjoined to act as Shomrei Mitzvot, as those that observe the commandments given to us by God. The standards by which we are judged do not change, regardless of the level of challenge, difficulty, or threat to our well-being, within limits, of course. We begin this intense listing of mandated behaviors with how one acts toward the beautiful woman taken captive from the enemy, how a man's behavior towards multiple wives is dictated, and what to do with the wayward son. What do these three things have in common? What shared challenge do they represent? In each case, there's a strong element of something that should not be. We should not be taking captives, probably should not have more than one spouse to a customer, and we certainly would not want a son or a child who goes completely off of everything that they have been taught. But we recognize reality. So within that reality, there are certain accommodations that are made that allow one to do what they may be doing, which maybe they really shouldn't ideally, but to structure how it's done. So, for example, if one sees a woman that he desires in war amongst the captives, then there are laws and standards to structure how this is to be done, to challenge the initial desire and to ensure that in the end, the behavior that is taken is honorable. With multiple wives, which were clearly allowed, as we have discussed in the past, although this may not be so advisable for all the obvious reasons. One is not to have favorites, nor are they to take away one's rightful inheritance in terms of the children they bear. A rebellious son is also not an issue that we may want to address or admit or acknowledge that it's there, but it can happen. And here there are parameters for who is the rebellious son, which, by the way, are very narrowly defined, and how one must discipline them. Further, we are taught that this child can only be from a fully functioning family. In other words, there are many strictures, many limitations about how things should be, while acknowledging that this is not always the case in our lives. So when we confront these difficult situations, we need a plan B. Namely, how do we act in less than ideal circumstances? And what additional elements do we add in terms of how we are to proceed in these less than favorable circumstances? Throughout our Parsha, we are learning about how we walk, halicha, as we observe the Jewish law, halacha, at all times and in all cases. What is so interesting is that while Devarim is thought of as the review lesson and even called Mishnah Torah, the repetition, so many of these laws appear here for the first time to prepare the next generation and those that come after them who did not experience Sinai and everything that it entailed directly, reminding them how they are to act at all times, regardless of where they are or what they are doing or when they are out and about, Ki Teitzei, and whether the circumstances are expected and normative or not so. Also in our Parsha, we have this. Ki yikra kan tzipor lefanecha b'derech. If a bird's nest happens to appear before you on the road, on a tree or on the ground, and it contains baby eggs, fledglings, or eggs, baby birds. If the mother is sitting upon the fledgling or upon the eggs, you will not take the mother upon the young. And notice that it says the ki yikara kan tzipor. This is an unusual expression. Usually we talk about when you will go or when you will find or when whatever. But if something calls out to you, kara, kuf, resh, aleph, somehow something is calling out to you from this kansipur. Now, in the Gemara we learn that we're not supposed to add, we're not supposed to subtract, we're not supposed to think about this as compassion for animals, tsar balei chayim, because God commands us. It's a hook, it's a commanded action. Just do it. Don't ask for reasons. Don't find rationale. And the thinking behind that is that if we wait to find rationale behind all the mitzvot, then we may pick and choose in terms of what appeals to us and what doesn't, and we shouldn't do that. We just do it because God tells us. So what do you do when this kansipur calls out to you? Look, here I am. Maybe not in direct sight line, but it's there and you happen to see it. You shall send away the mother bird, shalech, tishalech. It's the imperative form. You will surely send away the mother. And then you may take the young for yourself. And then it says, L'man yitav lecha v'harakta hayamim, in order that it goes well for you and you increase your days. And by the way, this same reward, if you will, or consequence is indicated for kibud avim, for honoring a father and a mother. And one of the stories, by the way, in the Gemara, that was sort of the end of Elisha ben Abuya, was when he was walking and he saw a father and he saw a son, and he said, go up on a ladder and get that bird, and the son fell and died. And then there's all these discussions about how could something happen that was terrible when one was on the way to do a mitzvah, that clearly his days were not lengthened and it did not go well for him. So it's not that, oh, I get it, I understand it. We don't. But there's something bigger here, and that's where we're going with this particular discussion. According to Stephen Savitsky of the Orthodox Union, he says, the mitzvah of kansipur epitomizes a unique aspect of a Jew's responsibility. Unlike most other mitzvot, there's absolutely no preparation necessary before fulfilling this commandment. In fact, as we say, ki yakara kansipur. In other words, I wasn't expecting this to happen. I didn't see it. I didn't put up my sukkah, and I didn't prepare my Pesach meal, and I didn't prepare for Shabbat or whatever. It just happens to be there. And this is what you have to do. You have to chance upon this mitzvah. These are mitzvot, or this is an example of something that is totally unexpected, that will happen before you, and you will have to make a determination. In other words, it is not on the first line of action that this is how things are supposed to be. Like the Eshatar, like the beautiful woman that's captive. You are not supposed to do this, okay? This is not something that's accommodated, if you will. So what this does is it gives us a very interesting dynamic and option of saying, wait a minute, this is a situation I am not familiar with. This is not something that was spelled out in the halacha I learned, but how do I act? How do I act with kindness? How do I do what I do in a way that shows who I am, no matter where I am and no matter how different the situation is? Rabbi Svitsky continues, you have to chance upon this mitzvah. It must suddenly appear before you with none of the prior planning. It is a mitzvah that is totally unexpected. For a Jew, this is a carpe diem opportunity. This is, according to Savitsky, a very profound lesson, that there are kansipur moments in our lives, sudden chances to help people, to do something good, to do something that makes life better when you observe the need and it's not expected or it's not accommodated in the laws that already exist. What a wonderful and meaningful concept. We do not just do what is commanded, but also when we see something before us that calls out to our sensibilities, requiring an expanded notion of acceptable and needed behaviors, we respond. This is going lifnei misharat din, above and beyond the letter of the law, as we are told multiple times, in modeling God's own behavior. as we see repeatedly in the Gemara. Rashi takes a somewhat different approach, as he intones the notion of goreret mitzvah, chasing after a mitzvah. Yakara, the bird's nest calls out to you, so you chase the opportunity. Doing one mitzvah puts you in a positive trajectory, and not doing so achieves the opposite, sending one down a downward spiral. As Rashi explains, when you build a new house, if you keep the mitzvah of sending away the mother bird, you will end up building a home, and you will fulfill the mitzvah of building a railing for the roof of your house. For one mitzvah brings another mitzvah. Mitzvah goreret mitzvah. You will then come to a stage when you will have a vineyard, a field, nice clothes, hence the ordering of these parshiot with all of these mitzvah. In contrast, regarding a downward momentum, Rashi explains the law of the beautiful captive woman, the hated wife, and the rebellious son in the following manner. If he marries the captive woman, he will end up hating her, as it states afterwards, when a man has two wives, the one he hates. And in the end, she will bear him a son, who will be a rebellious son because of the lack of a stable home. This is the reason for the order of the parshiot here, and that is Rashi's reading. As we continue, in chapter 23, we learn more about when we go out, Ki Teitzei, and how we must behave. Here we come into contact with others, including those with whom we have had a troubled past. Lo tita'ev Adomi ki achichahu, lo tita'ev Mitzri ki ger hayita ba'arzo. You will not despise the Edomite because he's your brother, and you shall not despise an Egyptian because you lived in their land. Children who are born to these groups in the third generation may enter the Kahal Hashem, may enter the Kehillah of the Jews if they wish. Here we see that even those who mistreated Bnei Yisrael or caused them to do wrong are not to be hated. How hard this is to accomplish. We don't have to look too far to see what that dynamic is. We who live in this time with the results of so many established, generationally continued enmities clearly know that this is difficult, if not impossible to achieve. However, this too is part of the life that God has inspired us to live. In our world today, where we are witness to much vitriol and hatred all around us, I wonder if this is the true test of the Ahavta l'reacha kamocha, to love and accept even that which is less than in ourselves as well as in others around us. In chapter 24, we build on this notion as we learn about the many ways people can be taken advantage of, that the Bnei Yisrael are not to do. Paying day laborers that day, faithful relationships with one's wife, and so much else. And then this statement, V'zacharta ki eved hayita b'Mitzrayim, v'yivtecha Hashem Elokecha misham al ken anochi mitzavcha la'atzot et hadavar hazeh. You shall remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and the Lord God redeemed you from there. Therefore, I command you to do this, to act this way, to act better than what you have seen others do, to not replicate the misdeeds of those that have hurt you. It's Robert Bly's sibling society that the problem is kids today, and he uses the story of Jack and the Beanstalk, don't want to go up and kill the giant, they want to become the giant. And this is absolutely what we are not supposed to do. So let's unpack this a bit. First of all, notice that this is about how the Bnei Yisrael are to treat others outside of their community, regardless of how they were treated by them. Here is the new society and better way to be, I have often discussed in these shirim. We were not brought out of Mitzrayim by God to be like Mitzrayim. We were not saved by the Amalekites, who will be at the end of our Parsha. in order to turn around and be like them, but rather to show another way. This is how we are supposed to be wherever and whenever we go out. Ki Teitzei. Parak 54, Nun Daled of Yeshayahu, is the chosen haftarah for this parsha. Here we read as follows, with a challenge stated that once again expands upon how we are to treat each other and all people, both those inside our camp, however that is defined, and those outside as well. Harchivi makom ahalech. Widen the place of your tent. Stretch the curtains of your habitations. Let them go far. Let them be welcoming. You will prevail, and your seed shall inherit nations. V'zaracha goyim yirash. And will repeople desolate cities. And the idea is that when you do that, you do not practice those misdeeds of others. I often reflect upon the series of chapters in Parshat Kadoshim and Amor, 18, 19, 20, of Vayikra, where first we see the practices of the Mitzrayim we are not supposed to do, where we came from. Then we're told how we are supposed to behave. And then we are told how the Canaanim behave that we are not supposed to. They are arbitrary. They abuse people. They are not holding on to loyalties, which is really how we're supposed to read that. Those of you that are thinking of any specific verses, I'm just putting this in a context. And then we are supposed to worry about every one of us and be concerned about every one of us in our own communities and model that for others and then show that concern for others as well. Clearly, once again, we need to read this carefully and consider what is meant here. What does widening our tents have to do with expansion and repeopling desolate cities? Let's not be cavalier about how we read. Tifrotsu means tikbaru. Strengthen. Make it better. As you create or you show people how to enable this type of society, make sure it's a better one. Make sure it's one that's worthy of who you are, Ki Teitzei, wherever you go. Take care to understand exactly what we mean by extending the tent and prevailing. This is not an indictment upon others as much as a command for ourselves. We notice those with narrow tents. We notice the Amalekites that did not help those who were striving behind, the Mitzrayim that were prejudiced against the Jews, the many, many different historical pieces. Yes, they should do better. But if they can't do better, it doesn't mean, Ki Teitzei, when we go out, we take on their actions. We do not, we cannot. As Rashi teaches, we should be strong. What do we mean by that? I would suggest that this is a reference to the inner fortitude that is to guide us wherever and whenever we go out. We are not to forget who we are. We are not to forget who we are supposed to be and who and what God commands us to be, with every action counting and having the potential of either lifting us and those around us or having us fall on our faces, so to speak. Victims to values that are not supposed to be part of the mix. Greed, as in the kings who acquire too much property, understanding that no dictate provided by God is unimportant or meaningless. Not having a lack of discipline in family matters and relationships and so forth. And if we don't mind this, then what? Remember the end of the Parsha? You all know it as the Maftir, and that we read it on the Shabbat right before Purim. Here we go. Ki toavat Hashem Elokecha kol aseh ele kol aseh avel. Zachor et asher asa lecha Amalek b'derech b'tzeitchem mitzrayim. For whoever does these things, whoever perpetrates such injustice, it is an abomination to the Lord your God. Remember what Amalek did to you on the way when you went out of Mitzrayim. How they happened upon you. Asher karacha. Remember that word? from the Kansipur. You weren't expecting them. They weren't expecting you. Look what they did to you, right? And cut off the stragglers at your rear when you were faint and weary. Amalek lo yira Elohim, did not have awe for God. Therefore, says God, I will grant you respite from all of your enemies, and I will give you the land to possess. Zachor Amalek mitachad hashamayim lo tishkach. We repeat at the end, remember Amalek under the heavens, do not forget. This parallels, karacha, happens upon you, the language of the Kansipur. Amalek did not treat you when they happened upon you, when you called out to them for help, if you will, the very way you were being asked to be concerned about the bird. Ki yakara Kansipur lefanecha b'derech b'chol etz o al haaretz. If the Kansipur calls out to you on the way, in the tree, on the ground, and there are fledgling and eggs, this is what you are to do. Is that clear enough? No. We do not ignore the bird's nest. We do not kick it to the side. And if we are so careless not to observe carefully what is around us, we may forget that our purpose of overcoming Amalek was not to become Amalek. That would clearly be a chilul Hashem. We are to show a better way, meaning not just when we are doing specifically Jewish ritual things, but this parsha is about everything that happens upon our way or calls out to us in our daily lives, including many mundane details, unusual situations in which we find ourselves, and whatever happens, whatever calls out to us upon the way, calling out to us for action. These are challenges that demand the best of us. This is what God wants for us. And this is what we should want for ourselves. Shabbat Shalom. And may we all have a meaningful week with continued prayers for Israel and all those suffering from what is going on in our very fractured world. And may we not miss opportunities to hear what is calling out to us on the way. Shabbat Shalom.